Techlandia is recorded at the central office on the east side in Portland. Central office is a one stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com. Welcome to Techlandia, a podcast about and for the technology industry, a place to learn, connect, and engage with leaders and thinkers involved in the technology industry. You can check us out at techoregon.org, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Techlandia, Tao's regular podcast series. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of Tao. And with us is our guest today. We're pleased to have Curtis Shirey, who's with Aspasia Wealth Management. Curtis, welcome.
Hey, Skip. Thanks so much for having me here today. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, as most people know, I like to start these off by asking each of our guests to share their personal professional journey. So I was wondering if you could take us throughout your career up to present day and sort of explain a little bit about what are some of the things that have kind of animated you in your professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got out of college at 21 and wanted to work with money because never had really had a ton of it growing up. So, once you have a little bit of freedom, you're like, oh, let's go work in money. So I started off just really as more or less of a stockbroker selling, mutual funds and various stocks for a small firm up here in Portland. And it was working through that I developed the passion that I have today, which is, really trying to address some of the inequities in the financial system that it stands now. I think, as most people know, there is a trend of kind of financial unhealthiness around that the whole world is really dealing with in terms of personal financial unhealthiness. So, and really diving into taking a look at where that comes from and what solutions could be put into place to help fix that. And that's really what started the vision of to where we are at Aspasia at this point.
That's great. I mean, I remember, having conversations with folks earlier in my career when we'd be comparing notes, and it was like, a lot of this stuff around financial planning wasn't taught in the high schools that we went to, and it's almost like financial literacy needs to start from a very early age. And I'm wondering, do you, in some of the wealth management advice that you're providing to your clients, how do sort of kids or the next generation factor into it?
And I think that is a really good point. The ability to be to be personally financially healthy is all like habit based, in my opinion.
Mm.
I think about this all the time, right? Like, we do really well with dental care in this country. If you go to a country that doesn't do well, or community that doesn't do well with dental care, and give them a bunch of the newest toothbrushes, that's probably not going to do anything, because a financial health, whether it's medical health or dental health or any type of health, is going to be based upon your behaviors over a long period of time. So where the next generation comes into play is, how do we continue to have these conversations to make sure that younger people are fluent in this system, or at least conversant in this system, to create a deal of comfort. Expanding on that a little bit more, that's where I really try to position our company, is being able to have conversations with people of all generations, as opposed to really focusing on a one specific generation.
That's great. So I wanted to take a step back here and ask you a question. So Aspasia is kind of a unique and interesting name for a wealth management firm. What's the origin
Yeah,
behind the name?
yes, I'm a big nerd, and I have actually a educational background in communication studies. And one of the first courses you'll take in communication theory will talk about Pericles' funeral oration, which is a very famous speech given by Pericles during the Athenian and Persian War, thousands of years ago or whatever. But the crux of that story is that apparently Pericles didn't actually write that. Aspasia, this woman that was kind of his advisor, was the one who actually wrote that speech, and she also gave advice to many of the prominent figures in Athens at that time. So I thought that was a really cool story, kind of nerdy, but that's what I went with. at a kind of 23, 24 years old, trying to think about what you're going to call your company.
That's great. And, at your core, you provide advice, right?
Yeah,
Advisory services. So it's
and we're
great.
we're kind of behind the scenes too, right? We're not supposed to be the person getting all the credit for your financial success. So it did line up.
Nice, nice. So I'm wondering if you could provide a little background on Aspasia and sort of explain a little bit like what's your approach to wealth management? How do you differentiate your services from some of what else is out there?
Yeah, this will probably be a long-winded answer, but just start by identifying the issue that is important to us, right? Is that there is a big gap between those that are financially well and that those who aren't as financially well. And that is going to come down to individual behaviors, right? People need to make smart financial decisions, but also there needs to be a system that helps promote some of that. And so in my experience working in the financial industry, that's the issue that I saw and wanted to make sure that our company addressed was the systemic problems in the financial industry that do not help or even hurt this concept of financial wellness. And so specifically, right now, most of the financial services industry, their compensation is going to be tied to asset size, right? It's going to be a commission-based system to where somebody sells something of a certain dollar amount and gets paid off that, or it's going to be as a percentage of the assets that people are managing in our industry. That automatically creates an environment where you're selecting for a very small amount of the population that already has money. And it doesn't mean it doesn't work in a way that allows us to cater to those that might need us the most. And so addressing that was the biggest thing that was on my mind. And one of the simplest ways to begin with that is by introducing a new sort of service model where, again, as I said, a lot of people are selling investment products or managing large investment portfolios. We really focus on how do we bill people hourly. Um, that sounds simple, but the industry isn't built for that. So we had to create that hourly billing model within ourselves. Once you start billing hourly, you open up a kind of whole nother can of worms because now the way that you work with people has to be scalable, right? You can't just
Hmm.
you can't have a system that doesn't allow you to be repeat that over and over again. Again, that infrastructure not being there, we had to really build that. Luckily, in 2025, there's a lot of technology that enabled us to do that, right? From the way that we create our onboarding process, from the way that we do service on the back end. All of that has to really dive into some of this more modern technology to be able to do that repeatedly. Um, it's through that onboarding process that we try to begin our behavior coaching. A big part of anybody getting involved in the system is trust. And so we try to have a high contact, repeatable, repeatable onboarding process with our clients so that not only are they developing good habits, but they're embedding themselves into this financial system and building that fluency that we think is really important toward long-term success.
That's really great. This notion of like a financial coach, I think is
Mhm.
really powerful. Because to your point, you know, any sort of health really is a factor of learned behavior and repeatable behavior habits, right?
Mhm.
And to ingrain something, you need some coaching. I think of like a lot of the people that, have a New Year's resolution to go to the gym in January, and then by like February 1st, they're not anywhere to be seen in the gym.
Yeah.
And so someone to kind of hold you accountable. I'm wondering, is that part of your overall service offering? And is that offered as kind of like an hourly rate or part of a package where you'll essentially have regular check-ins with clients to make sure that they're kind of sticking to a plan, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, at the very minimum, we wanna meet with people at least once a year. If you're just starting out, or excuse me, at least every 6 months, excuse me. If you're just
Mhm.
starting out, we're probably even on a, every quarterly basis there. Again, it's where are you in this learned behavior process, right? If you're really advanced after working with us for a couple years, maybe twice a year, maybe just once a year is fine, but as we start out, we wanna be in a very high contact role.
Mhm. One thing I've seen just in sort of my personal observations over the years is that people I think often struggle with, cash flow management
Yeah.
for their respective households. And I think a lot of wealth management firms are more like, hey, just provide us with your investments and we'll take care of that. But there isn't necessarily as much focus or attention put on this. Like, no, let's look at this holistically and look at what are you spending on a weekly basis on what things, what's necessary, what can you cut out or reduce. And I'm wondering, is that like part of your focus with this coaching element and thinking about folks who are, dealing with some financial precarity in some cases, right? I mean, that's a source of stress for a lot of people. And if you're going to address that, you kind of have to get down to the granular aspects of managing someone's household financially.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It always starts on cash flow, and one of the key things that we try to do actually is 'cause when you talk about cash flow, you're talking about a budget, and that's a very big word, right? In terms of all the different expenses that we have to navigate. And so where we start is trying to solve that question first. And the way we do that is breaking up the categorization of expenses in terms of cash flow. Because at the end of the day, there are things that you have to pay for, and there's things that you want to pay for. And what we try to do is identify with folks what they have to pay for. The good thing about things that you have to pay for is that you have to pay for them. So you don't have a lot of control over that. That means you don't really have to think about it too much. Just kind of assume that money's gone, and we just focus on the money that we can control. And how do we quantify these non we call them discretionary expenses, excuse me. How do we take that number on a monthly basis and translate that into daily behavior? Um, Basically, what we do is we identify how much somebody has on a discretionary basis to spend and divide that up by 30 days and say, hey, this means that you can spend $100 a day or $20 a day. And that's an easier way to start addressing this problem as opposed to trying to bite it all in one bite there.
hmm So in terms of this sort of coaching, as it were, I'm wondering what are some of the areas that you've seen make the biggest difference in terms of like all the things that people typically spend money on? Like, what are some common pitfalls that folks kind of fall into, as it will, when it comes to um, their financial management?
Yeah, I think the ones that I think of are 3. Number 1, I was talking to him about this, buying cars. That was my my biggest pitfall when I was coming up is that desire to once you've saved and once you have enough money to immediately go buy something that might not be in your best interest over a long period of time. That's a big one. The other one is, real estate. Real estate is obviously valuable as an investment in some cases, like most things. Most things can be valuable in certain cases. But what I see a lot with real estate is people prioritize that goal as opposed to flexibility and being able to have liquidity in their bank account, things of that nature. And so that can get some difficulties as they get a little bit older. And the final one is, and this one might surprise you. It's the right now there's a lot of people passing away, unfortunately, as the population gets older, and it's the lack of preparation for that. So a lot of folks haven't really done what they need to in terms of setting up their estate so that it can pass to their beneficiaries. And there's a lot of money wasted on that once people do end up passing away without a plan.
hmm Yeah, there's a lot of great tools out there now that help to kind of automate and streamline that whole process. Not surprisingly, technology
Mhm.
has kind of come to the aid of folks. But you're right, that sort of it'll happen later on down the road. I don't have to worry about it now. Sort of mentality is usually what shoots people in the foot.
Yeah, yeah. And even with the technology, especially when it comes to you talk about some of the estate transfer stuff, it's lacking in a sense, and it's lacking in the practical implication of that technology. For example, you can go out there and get a will, Skip, but um, afterwards, you can't take that will to a bank account and get your grandfather's bank account transferred to your name. You got to go to court first, and then you got to go to the bank with a letter from that you got from the court, and then you got to navigate their process on that end too. So there's just all these considerations that are not necessarily thought about when it comes to long-term planning.
Right, right. And it's kind of this, how do you kind of prevent some of that tendency to just want to, you know, essentially money comes in and it's like, oh, great, this is the new normal. Well, let's not break our financial plan just
Mhm.
because you've got a little bit of extra cash lying around. And I look at like Dylan Gabriel
Yeah,
as someone
yeah,
who most of our listeners probably know quite well, where he's notorious for despite being one of the highest earning NIL athletes, drove a minivan that was leased, and it
yeah,
was just because he wanted to be able to drive around with his linemen.
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
needed a bigger car that could get in and out of. And he could have spent a lot more, but he didn't. And it's kind of that kind of discipline that I think is often lacking. And so I'm wondering too, like, are there certain pieces of content and other types of tips and tricks that you all publish on a regular basis that can help educate folks about what it means to have a financial plan and stick to it?
Yeah, we're really big in that's kind of the back half of our behavior coaching, our, lens is how do we get things out that communicate some of the things that you're supposed to do? And so we have a blog post that we write every couple weeks or so, and I also post like educational videos on my LinkedIn and stuff. And they're always going to have one of two lenses, right? One is going to be addressing just systemic behaviors that we can put into place now, like immediately, to have a positive impact. Another lens might be just there's always some crisis going on in the world, and so just giving the financial context to how to deal with those crises. So we had a with the big thing with the tariffs over the last couple months has been the thing we've been talking about quite a bit. But that's just an example of that.
hmm and we deal with a lot of entrepreneurs in our association, and many of them are very much focused kind of on the business and the immediate task at hand, the next thing they need to check off their list. And I've found that there's usually not a lot of time and attention paid to, okay, what kind of wealth are we building with this business? And what does that mean for me personally, for my family, et cetera? And how can I make sure that all of that's taken care of early? So I'm wondering what kind of advice do you give to entrepreneurs? How early is too early? And what are some of the considerations they need to think about?
Yeah, that's a really big question. So thanks for giving it to me. Yeah, I think you know I think the big question that I struggle with that at least is what is going to make you happy and making sure that your goals align with that. Because I think as an entrepreneur, you set these goals at, whatever. I set goals at age 25. And then you have to work really hard, Skip. And so you put your head down and you're busting your butt. And then you're 30 and you look up and you might have had all your goals. You might have had all the goals that you set at 25, but you didn't really realize along the way that maybe some of your priorities changed a little bit. And so that's the big thing that I always think about is I wish I would have been um, more on top of it in terms of making sure like what I'm doing aligns with the life that I want to live in the moment. And I think that's, kind of to your point about Dylan Gabriel, that's a big thing too that we struggle with as a professional operation is how do we balance the in the moment joys that people want to feel as opposed to this long-term strategy and being able to kind of have those in a healthy tension is something that we really try to think about a lot.
That's great. I'm wondering too, like, if you think about some of the content and advice that you're providing to folks in terms of whether it's newsletters or email lists that or emails that you're sending out on a regular basis. What are any sort of like books or other resources that you've found to be helpful for folks as they're starting to kind of get a grounding in the basics, and when it comes to financial management?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my background is not so much economic and financial in nature, it's psychology and communication, so a lot into behavior. So the book that I'm actually gonna recommend is something that is more to do with behavior, but I think it says a lot in terms of managing, your finances. And that book is called, Thinking Fast and Slow by,
hmm
Daniel Kahneman. Re It really dives into the processes of making decisions and why we make those decisions, in terms of specifically with, like, how to deal with how to deal with, like, market concepts and that stuff that we deal with at work. I actually have a quote from that book in my office so that my clients can read can reference it. But it just talks about how people are really bad at probabilistic thinking, basically, and that ultimately the odds tend to, the outcome tends to follow what the probabilities show. So, like in the market, there could be a very strong market downturn that gets people all scared, which is normal. But the odds show and the history shows that over a long period of time, these seem to work itself out. And so that's kind of the concept that we like to get across to people is that try not to make decisions based on emotion, try to make decisions based off of things that we can actually observe, actual facts to the extent that we have them, and go from there.
Well, I think it's so important that folks feel comfortable, kind of talking about and sharing with their families in particular the importance of financial management. I think that's something that growing up, a lot of folks in my network didn't necessarily have parents that talked freely and openly about money, and I think you raised a good point that there's kind of more education that definitely needs to happen societally. And if folks can just take the time to do it in a disciplined way, because there's big health implications too. If you're dealing with financial uncertainty, that causes stress.
Sure.
And if you've got a plan and are sticking to it, it's just like going to the gym or eating your vegetables, right?
Yeah, no, exactly, and there's just like the systemic considerations of that, and yes, financial wellness is health related. There's so much health benefits and health detriments if you're financially unwell. So I always ask myself, why don't we as a system look at it like that? We have a ton of investment and focus into like health benefits and dental benefits as part in terms of a employment retention, right? How do we
Mm.
start incorporating financial wellness into that? Is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about that. In addition to that, if we are going to have this conversation about financial literacy, then let's approach it like a language. A big thing that we try to do is how do we cater the words that we're using in terms of talking about this stuff to fit with our audience. I have a passion for language learning, and if I go to a different country and they start using really big words and talking really quickly, my comprehension is going to be zero. But they talk to me slowly as a learner, that's more valuable to me over time. So all those types of things I think are important to have at the top of the consideration of folks like me.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I'm wondering too, you mentioned a little bit about some of the ways that you're looking at using technology to improve the client experience with your firm and also become more efficient. I'm wondering what are some of the areas that you see changing in wealth management with technology?
Yeah, and it's really slow, and I think we're still about 10 years behind, but the comfortability and use of AI has changed quite a bit. I think the biggest improvement we've made in using AI over the past, 2, 3 years right now has been with the note taking. In terms of note taking in conversations and note taking in meeting. A big part of our role is documentation. And
Mhm.
that actually hurts, I think, accessibility in a lot of ways, is that it takes so much time to manage a relationship sometimes from a regulatory standpoint that people focus on managing the relationships that are going to yield the most profit. So I think that's the biggest growth there. What I like to see more of though, Skip, is straight through processing. And what I mean by that is entering data one time, because we have a CRM system, right? And we also have
Okay.
a system that we use for the client accounts that we open at one institution, but there might be a different system at a different institution and yet a different system to do larger or different financial planning concepts, a different system to do like portfolio construction. So the more that we can really dive into straight through processing or automated integrations between all those different databases, it goes a long way.
Excellent. And as we kind of wrap up here, I'm wondering what are some of the takeaways or final remarks you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think the biggest remark that I want people to grasp is that financial health is like any other type of health. It's a behavior. There's no one investment or one thing that you can do today to drastically improve that, unfortunately. It's a daily investment of time and focus to get to those long-term goals.
Well, thanks for taking some time to join us. We really appreciate it, and I know our listeners will as well. This is an important topic, and I'm glad we're able to carve out some time for it.
Thank you so much, Skip.